I think everyone knows today that we have what we call information inflation or information overload. Information is everywhere, and from customers that we are talking daily and weekly, majority of them tell us that they have plenty of data, right? But the question is whether the information they have is relevant, right? Is the information or the data relating the cyber that they gather is relevant to their company? And more importantly, what processes do they have in place in order to translate this data into actionable activities that at the end will improve their security posture? Or, we are in the game of reducing risk, right? So at the end of the day, how do we take the data, translate it into activities that will reduce the risk? Cybersecurity is not an IT task. It is a business risk. Based on our conversations in the last 6 months, it seems like there is a positive shift in thinking. We see it with management people and board levels. Saying that, management and boards, they understand that they can no longer treat cybersecurity as just another task, and especially another task which the current IT team can manage with their existing IT frameworks. With the rise of cyber committees, meaning boards will create subcommittees just on cybersecurity, it's crucial that information presented to senior management and board is both relevant and actionable, right? Management and boards, they want data, but they want it in a way that then they can do something with it. Board members, they understand risk, and they want to get evidence-based answer to some of the following questions. How secured are we? What is our risk? Are we protected from what happened last week to our customer or to our partner? I know this question tends to come up every time there is a known breach. And what else do senior management and boards need to consider as part of their cybersecurity risk management? In order to answer some of those questions, we all need to gather relevant intelligence. So changing the term from data into intelligence. Now, to make sure we are all on the same page, and I apologize to people on this call that are intimate with threat intelligence, but I do want to spend the next minute to define what threat intelligence is, which is basically information that every organization uses in order to understand the threats that will or are currently targeting the organization. This information is used then to prepare, prevent, and identify cyber threats that are looking to take advantage of their valuable and vulnerable resources. Threat intelligence, as you can see here, is categorized into 4 key domains. The data collection, the analysis, and the consumption for each of one of those types is different. Strategic threat intelligence, it's about providing an overview of the threat landscape of the organization, and the audience are the executive level security professionals. Tactical threat intelligence, however, it's more about specific details on threat actors and tactics that they're using. While technical cyber threat intelligence, and this is what I think is the most popular, or if you are on the JCSC Slack, organizations and company constantly collaborate, it's about IOCs, indications of compromise, IP addresses, URLs, hashes, and so on and so forth. And operational threat intelligence touches around knowledge about attacks, more insights around the motive behind the attacks, the nature of the attacks, the timing, and how it's been carried out. Separately to threat intelligence, organizations, like I'm sure your companies, conduct a variety of penetration testing activities in order to obtain an understanding of the security posture. Some of the organizations we work with do it annually, some of them do it more frequently. Some are being driven, unfortunately, just because of compliance, while others have more structuring to it and are doing it across various attack surfaces. Most of the organizations, however, relies at the end of the day on the tester's level of skills and experience. In most cases, the pen testers design and operate those engagements by reliance on various generic penetration testing frameworks like as OSWAP, ISAF, MITRE ATT&CK, and others. Cyber operational resilience, we believe, requires that organizations, people, processes, and IT systems continuously adapt to the fast-changing cyber threat landscape. To avoid significant losses, cyber operational resilience must be proactive as opposed to just reactive. By combining what seems like separate domains of threat intelligence and pen testing, we believe, and we see others in the market, that organizations can assess their security maturity through testing their resilience against targeted, relevant, and specific threats. Or in our words, weaponizing threat intelligence through ongoing security validation and testing. Now, before I share with you Advent One's threat intelligence-led security testing framework, I think it's beneficial to use a relevant example. As you probably heard, and as you saw also today, there is a major conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which we all hope will not escalate into a full-blown military maneuver. Nations, albeit Russia was the first to start, nations are using cyber weapons and launching cyber warfare campaigns as a means to achieve their national objectives. Now, by now, you probably think yourself, what is this slide relevant to this discussion? And also why Australian organization be considering such events in the Northern Hemisphere when planning and executing their security validation activities. So allow us to take you back to 2018. Back then, Russian threat actors launched the NotPetya ransomware attack against Ukraine companies. Unfortunately, due to the inherent nature of the internet, it is very challenging to limit the extent of such large-scale cyber attacks, and it's very hard to forecast collateral damage. This resulted with few Australian organizations becoming also victims of the NotPetya ransomware attack, albeit not being targeted by those military threat actors. Now, going back to the topic and starting to talk about our framework, based on our experience at Advent One and working with clients for the past few years, we came up with a holistic approach and framework to security validation as testing. As part of that holistic approach, we also defined what we think is a threat intelligence-led testing framework, and it was developed around conducting breach and attack simulations to test and optimize security posture. The framework that I'll share with you in the next slide is applied across 3 levels of maturity, and the maturity, we mean the client's maturity, because we always take the approach of fit for purpose, value for money. So we try to avoid from cookie cutter and repeat for every client. So within this model, we came up with 3 maturity levels where in the foundation tier, we focus on known attacks as a whole, then followed by threat actor profiling simulations. And by now there is plenty of intelligence that attributes or can categorize different actors that target different sectors of the market. And the last one is a full-on simulations, which are based on TTPs, but that are all, and for some people who wants a bit more elaboration on TTPs, it's about specific tactics and techniques that malicious actors are using, but we align them specifically to the client's threat landscape. So at a high level, this is basically our threat intelligence-led testing framework. We learned that by ensuring that we analyze and refer to 3 key domains or key factors, we are able to come up with very, very valuable assessment and insights to the client. The first factor that we take into consideration is the organization's business, right? Every business is different from each other. It has different board members, it has different management team, it has a different risk appetite, it is subject to different threats. So we look at the risk profile and the threat modeling of the organizations. We then refer to their environment, or as we call it, attack surface, and the different attack surface. And finally, we leverage relevant threat intelligence elements that are relevant for that organization. And combining them all together, we are coming up with scenarios that are targeted and relevant to organization. So putting the other slides or the framework into practice and using what we spoke about, the Russian and Ukraine conflict, just as an example. And please, we are not suggesting that the intelligence coming from the Russia-Ukraine is relevant to every single company in Australia. We are not suggesting that every time every customer needs to refer to it, right? By going through reviewing threat intelligence sources like the anomaly threat briefs, today you can identify relevant threat actors that are involved, the type of techniques they're using, the type of malwares that are starting to surface, and use them as artifacts when planning the testing. In our example, we picked up that there is a very dominant threat actor, hopefully I'll pronounce it properly, called Gamerdon, and they are using malwares called the Whispergate. And specifically, Whispergate type malware is also known to target organizations that are being protected using Microsoft Defender. So obviously that flavor of that variant of the malware is not relevant to everyone, but when it is relevant, by taking those intelligence elements, then using MITRE ATT&CK framework and many other online free resources, such as this navigator that is available, we can quickly identify the relevant attributes, the relevant attributed tactics that this threat actor is using. Now, we all know that threat actors and adversaries, they will reuse and reuse and reuse their techniques up until they're void, up until it's no longer successful. So by marking those and being able to identify them, we are able to combine all those three elements together: the client's risk profile, the attack surface, the intelligence element, and coming up very quickly with a very detailed, targeted, and relevant scenario that can test the security posture of an organization.
When we talk about weaponizing threat intelligence, what I'm effectively referring to is really proactive use of threat intel across your security operations, regardless of what they may be, whether it's more efficient incident responses, whether you're looking to make more strategic investments in defense tools, or the specific use case that I'm going to look at today is how to use threat intelligence to make a more informed risk assessment of a particular threat and incorporate your defensive posture into that. So how do you make sense of a threat such as those have been mentioned before, and how to assess the risk that your organization faces? For those of us who have been paying attention to the news, we're fairly aware that there has been a variety of activity on multiple fronts in Ukraine, and the cyber front is definitely one of those. So we're seeing cyber attacks making headlines across quite a lot of the large mainstream news outlets. And as we've witnessed in the past, there's a very real possibility that these attacks are going to spill out of the region and hit other collateral targets, so to speak. So how do we make sense of that? Well, Anomaly Threat Stream is effectively a platform that provides an operational single pane of glass for ingesting, processing, curating, management, and dissemination of all things threat intelligence. So it provides a variety of pre-configured integrations into Steam's downstream technologies and adversary simulation tools such as Attack IQ. But also what it does, it provides a great deal of information in the form of what we call threat bulletins around specific threats. So if you can see here, a lot of what's making the news and the headlines in the mainstream media is turning up here within the ThreatStream platform. And you can see here over on the right, just within the last 24 hours, there's been a variety of threat bulletins released. Now, if we drill down into any specific threat bulletins, we can these basically contain a variety of information. Some of it is strategic and operational intelligence, and others is basically informative, and they may also contain detailed technical information. This particular one gives a hint as to why some of the Ukrainian websites over the last 24 hours have been down. We're faced with the DDoS attack, which is nothing new, but we've got some intel behind that. We can also see that there are specific malwares used by some of the adversaries known to actually operate within Ukraine. So there's some detail on the TTPs and the malware families being used. We've also got information on the specific actors or the adversary groups that are known to be active in there as well. So these are maintained by Anomaly and get updated as new intel comes in. And there's also other information about other cyber activity in the region as well. So basically, ThreatStream provides that single pane of glass to get an understanding of not just the low-level detailed technical indicators, but what's going on in the world from a cyber point of view. Now, if we're actually worried about these cyber attacks spilling out into our environment, what we'd be primarily looking at is what are the actors that are active in the region? What are the TTPs, tactics, techniques, procedures that they use? And what type of malware has been observed? So based on a blog article, you might be reading this and you'll come across something known as Whispergate. So this was the malware that was used to Ukrainian government servers back in January. We've got a few articles on that. when you're actually using, browsing a blog entry as well, Anomaly provides a browser plugin to provide a little bit more context around what you're reading. So as you're trying to figure out whether this threat is relevant or whether this is intel that could be useful for you, it gives you a little bit more context. Again, highlighting the use of the not Petya ransomware that was used in the first spillover attacks back in 2017. But then we jump back into the Anomaly threat stream platform. We can pull up the same report. Now, what Anomaly does on the platform is using the STIX standards, it will draw associations and connections between any of the intel data points within the platform and anything else that's relevant. So what this does is associate, or through the term association, any intelligence with any other piece of intelligence on the platform. So we're going from a blog entry and a report about some various cyber activities to actually linking those to specific IOCs, or indicators, or as we call them, observables on the platform. And not only that, actually drilling down into more of the TTPs. So this is the operational level intel. So pretty much from one blog entry, we can go straight to understanding whether this context is relevant to us and going to actually doing extracting intel at multiple levels at the strategic, operational, and tactical level. If we want to investigate this a little bit further, we can pull up all of the individual reports that cover any topics of interest. Through a couple of right clicks, we can actually associate the actors. So what are the specific adversary groups that are known to be associated with these reports? In this case, we've got Gamodrin group. And then we can drill down and learn a little bit more about that. Now, from there, we may decide that this is an adversary group of interest and we're worried about them attacking us. We might want to look at their tactics, techniques, procedures. From there, we can actually pull those TTPs into a map of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So this can be used as a basis to how we actually respond against this particular threat by basically focusing in on the TTPs that they may use if they were to attack us. And then we can actually do a little bit more analysis and detail here. So the Anomaly platform provides a detailed means of actually drawing associations and connections, however you want to analyze the data between actors, IPs, hashes, strategic, operational, and tactical intel. And in this particular case, what we might be interested in doing was either looking for evidence of this particular group attacking us, in which case we would be looking for a list of the indicators, so specific tactical intel, or we can actually go back to extracting the TTPs. And if we wanted to assess our assess our environment as to how effective we can actually prevent these attacks, then we can extract this information and feed that to some adversary simulation tools or a red team, and they can come back with a vulnerability assessment, which basically allows us to come up with a holistic risk-based view of how we can protect ourselves against a strategic threat and map that right through the operational to the tactical.
So in both presentations from both Avi and Luke, you've seen references to TIDs, MITRE ATT&CK, TTPs, which are tactics, techniques, and procedures, as both have sort of alluded to. These are important. The MITRE organization really has brought us together as a community with a set of known attack behaviors, the TTPs, techniques, tactics, and procedures, that are essentially leveraged by adversaries in the wild to take advantage of gaps, configuration challenges, issues, vulnerabilities that exist within the corporate and obviously personal environments based on the adversaries. Avi introduced the current landscape around the Ukraine and Russia and how that's sort of coming to a head, and he introduced the Gamodrin group. Something you would have noticed when Luke was speaking was that the intelligence collected by Anomaly has actually gone one step further, and they actually identified multiple groups and actors. I don't know if you remember the names of those. One was Sandworm Group, and the other one was the Gamodrin Group, which Avi mentioned as well. And we'll take a look at them in a little bit of detail here in a moment, with some references made by MITRE to see exactly where that intelligence and how clever it is as to how it's advised that it's part of that particular current campaign and current issue from a military perspective we're seeing out of that region. And then I want to show you how you take all that threat intelligence you've gathered from those solutions or areas and actually leverage them against your environment in a safe manner to trigger your security posture to determine that you are successfully able to prevent those types of attacks from these particular adversaries at the time. And so that you've got a comfort level in your security posture and stack so that you know exactly what you're able to defend or ward off should they focus on our region, or some of that stuff spill over to the APAC region for us specifically here. What you can see on screen here is the MITRE website, attack.mitre.org. It's actually the attack aspect of the MITRE organization. And I'm going to use this as a bit of a threat intel component. Luke has shown us tactic IDs, techniques, and the mappings to attack within the Anomaly platform. That platform doesn't just obviously consume attack specific threat intelligence. It gets its own sources, their own research teams, and it's extremely advanced. This is one aspect that we have available to us as a cybersecurity community to leverage knowledge around some of those groups, actors, and associated campaigns that they may launch. Now, getting into it specifically, I know we're focusing on specifically the Ukraine and the Russian-based adversarial emulations that are going on now, or the attacks that we're seeing. And we've got two names that we've sort of been hearing about so far in our presentation. MITRE actually publishes everything that they research, find, and validate. And very quickly from the MITRE attack page, we can either look at individual tactics and techniques or specifically threat groups. Now, we're going to drill down on threat groups here just quickly. We're going to take a quick look down the list, and we'll find that the Gamadon group is here. If we select the Gamadon group, we actually see that this is a threat group that's been active since at least 2013 and target individuals likely involved in the Ukrainian government. So we can see there it's targeting individuals that are part of the Ukrainian government. So this is, we don't know where that's launched from, or we assume it's launched from Russia. But what the best part about this is that we can actually see from here that the known tactics, techniques, and procedures, or the known attack methods, this particular threat actor group leverages commonly as they're witnessed in the wild attacking a particular target. So we get all these T numbers and we get some names about different tactics, techniques, and procedures. We can click on these, drill right down, we can select them. These are the details and the numbers that Luke showed you in the Anomali screenshots that specifically led to threat intelligence data that we're modeling to based on behaviors witnessed from the Anomali system. What we're able to do is, and Avi showed you this earlier in his presentation, with an Attack IQ platform, leveraging, this is threat intelligence from the MITRE attack organization, we can actually view this mapped up against what they call the MITRE attack navigator. Now, this essentially is just populating that particular group and the associated tactics, techniques, and procedures, pulling it up and showing you very, very clearly here their known attack methods or their own techniques leveraged against a particular target in this case. Now, something that Attack IQ has done to make life easier, we are heavily aligned with the MITRE attack framework very, very early on in our inception. The reason for that is because a little bit of forethought, thinking that this would be something that the industry would map to, and quite coincidentally, it's been that case. So the MITRE attack framework is currently the framework everyone's talking about. What we can do from this perspective is very quickly just download the layer, which is all the selected information here in a JSON format, and then go ahead and import it straight into the Attack IQ platform. Now, before I do that, I'm going to take a quick look at the other threat group that Luke mentioned was correlated with the actual threat intelligence they'd received based on some of those particular attacks, and that was the Sandworm team. So here we see the Sandworm team, and this is known as to be a destructive threat group that's been attributed to Russia's General Staff Main Intelligence Directorate. So this one we know has been attributed to Russia. So it makes sense that these two groups, or these two groups, would have shared behaviors or tactics, techniques, and procedures. And some of these teams work in cohorts with one another. So we've got a number of different Russian-derived, you can tell most of the Russian-derived groups have bear as one of their titles, Cozy Bear, Voodoo Bear, etc. But essentially a lot of associated groups which lead to sharing of tactics, techniques, and procedures which are found amongst these groups. Here we have techniques used as well, and once again, we can go straight to view that particular set of tactics, techniques, and procedures up against the MITRE attack framework, which gives you how they're actually executed in what environments. Now, again, if we download this particular layered control, so all the individual sections of identified TTPs here, we can actually leverage the MITRE attack framework, the Attack IQ platform to import these. Now, I did the Gamadon group earlier because it is a significant number of known tactics, techniques, and procedures leveraged, and we have some results to review very, very briefly. But I also want to show that from the perspective of Attack IQ, this being our platform, we can actually take input from these solutions in the form of a MITRE attack navigator layer. So we essentially just grab, for example, the Sandworm team here, and I can supply a pretty logo as well to make it look nice. I can just call this, let's just call this Threat Intel. And then we can essentially import template. Now, very quickly, it's going to do a mapping between those technique IDs that you've seen Luke referred to, Avi referred to, and also what we've seen on the MITRE attack navigator pages there, import into a template, which we've conveniently called Sandworm team, which I can then select. I can see the associated tactic categories that the attack group or the MITRE attack group has identified, the individual behaviors, i.e. techniques and sub-techniques available that they have in their arsenal, which we can test against our environment. Now, what we're doing here is we're leveraging their real behaviors, their real tactics or attacks to attempt to use them in your environment to see if you're vulnerable or exposed to them. What we expect in this case is once we create an assessment from this and associate it to some assets in your environment, we expect your security controls to know these are malicious activities and identify things like, I'm going to launch a credential access tool, I'm going to try and dump your Active Directory database, these types of things, and prevent them. So what we're trying to do here is we're actually trying to become the adversary in your environment in a safe manner to trigger the security controls to showcase they can actually prevent a particular method being used by an adversary. Now, we've taken all the requirements of knowledge out of the conversation, and we more or less made it a point-and-click platform so you can actually leverage this very quickly through assessment templates. Advent One has a significant list of templates they've built in-house around different frameworks, different threat actors that they use to their customers today. Attack IQ includes some by default, but being able to import brand new threat intelligence out of something like the attack framework is extremely powerful in the way that you can, within a few clicks, leverage an adversarial emulation in your environment to ensure you are protected from that particular adversary. Now, The one thing that we have going right now with the Anomali team as well is that the fact that they're able to export into a MITRE ATT&CK navigator from a heat map style display of the results of that threat intelligence, well, quite simply, we do a very much similar thing. So what we're working on with the Anomali team is to have an overlaid map, which gives you the associated TTPs mapped to your prevention state, but prior to actually executing the assessment, pulling information in, which will then automatically generate based on not just one source of intelligence, being the MITRE ATT&CK framework, but all of the Anomali intelligence and threat intelligence they've captured, being able to enumerate that into a test, which you can then leverage against your environment. So taking that threat intelligence, making it actionable, and leveraging what we call a threat-informed defense. So threat intelligence comes from multiple sources. It's really tough to pull that together, organize it, which is something that the Advent One team has done extremely well, and be able to exercise that against your environment to ensure you can safely operate without that concern of that particular threat actor. Now, when it comes to running something like, if we take a look at the sandworm specific example here, or the other group, quite simply, to start an emulation, we already have the bare bones here. We click create assessment, create new. We have a number of adversaries positioned around the environment. We call them test points inside of Attack IQ. Essentially, this allows me to generate an assessment, associate it with a number of machines in my environment. In the case of the Weaponising assessment, I essentially ran this against 5 key hosts. Those hosts are a mixture of Windows and Linux devices. And essentially, we executed all 149 associated TTPs with this particular threat actor against the environment to produce our ability to identify, prevent, detect, etc. This is a lab environment. It's horrendously configured, or misconfigured, I should say. So we expect a lot of not prevented examples. But essentially, all this information comes back in the form of further intelligence, which becomes post-threat intelligence. It's a mouthful to say, but essentially it's once you've got your threat intelligence, once you've actually leveraged that threat-informed defense to test your environment, well, now you're looking at what your environment needs from a gap perspective to solve challenges that you may find. We have 2 standard states to be concerned about. We have not prevented and prevented, right? The other state we can find is through the use of querying your Splunk, your Palo Alto Networks firewall, your antivirus solution, what it might be, identifying are they logging these particular events. So specifically what we have here is we have all those Gameton known TTPs have been executed against the environment, and quite simply, we're able to see our risk profile or our ability to prevent based on specifics that we see here. Now, if we look at prevented examples, which there are some of in this group, you'll notice that we're doing things like screen capture scripts on Ubuntu hosts, Windows devices, all kinds of things, because they are cross-platform. You'll see some of these reported as error because they are, for example, launching a Windows batch script on a Mac device, which is obviously not going to be executable. So we take those results out of the story. But essentially, this is how we enumerate and run threat emulations by, actively emulating the adversary in the environment to determine success or failure of each of those particular TTPs. It's important that we have this data because what we've been running on so far to date is assumption. We assume breach all the time, but we don't know what we don't know. And threat intelligence is where we are informed, but how do we use that threat intelligence into actionable intel that we can actually use against our environment to validate success or failure? And that is through testing, through continuous testing. Now, this is an example of leveraging that threat intelligence to specifically enable you to test your environment from threat intel sources and come up with an idea of how your posture sits from that perspective. The other side of this particular webinar is based around security control validation or optimization of those security controls. And Avi alluded to the process of ingesting threat intelligence, testing your environment, hardening controls, and then retesting. And that's exactly the way that Attack IQ and our customers work together to actually harden and secure environments. Those activities, to Avi's point, are continuous. They're not just a once-off, because obviously there is change is dynamic, change occurs daily in organizations, and change not just to security controls, policies, and posture, but also software updates, staff, new machines coming into the organization. These change through change control and through just general maturation of the business structure that need to be tested continuously. So our customers traditionally run these styles of tests every other day or every week or every month to ensure that their posture maintains a level that they're happy with, that acceptable risk, if there is any, but ultimately they're trying to maintain a security posture that they consider to be the posture they're happy with in the environment. Now, we don't just have the ability to ingest threat intelligence. We actually have our own intelligence teams who produce what we call Attack IQ assessment templates. And these are specific templates to test different campaigns we see from ransomware awareness campaigns. We see spear phishing campaigns occur. We produce all this so that you can actually test your environment against flavor of the day type stuff, what's happening, different parts of the MITRE ATT&CK framework as well as test specific controls to ensure that you have recommended configurations in place. These can be configured to run continually through schedules, and essentially we can schedule any assessment to run as often as frequent as you like to ensure that maintenance of posture is maintained across the environment, and we can trigger alerts notifications when that posture changes. The Advent One team has produced a number of these templates around different threat actors specifically, and also threat intelligence they've gathered from their sources. And essentially what they're able to do is provide you with a really good after action report that tells you and shows you exactly where your gaps are, where your work is required, what mitigations need to go in place. And then they can offer to validate that after the fact through retesting to ensure that the gaps that you previously had have been filled and that you can be comfortable with the fact that you've done the mitigation the right way. Now, inside the Attack IQ platform, you've heard me mention about mitigations. That's typically something rather difficult to attempt to identify, should it be something foreign to you. Now, Attack IQ provides some context around that. So where something's not prevented, for example, this is probably not a wonderful scenario to leverage, but essentially here, we've got a successful connection over HTTP on 443, so using a non-standard port, but we provide you with high-level mitigation recommendations. Now, these are high-level, and the team at Advent One are able to interpret these into specific control-based changes. In this case, we've got maybe a bit of a line as to how you may block this in an IPS IDS solution, something like that. But essentially, the Advent One team contextually change this information specific to your control so that you know exactly what mitigation is required. When you apply the mitigation, they can retest and validate success there as well.